Figure
All
it
right.
out.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us another Thursday. Welcome back to Brown Girl Sound. Dom, okay. All right. Listen, it's always lit. It's always a party over here with us. We like each other for real, y'all. You know those housewives shows where you're like, are they really friends? Anyway, I digress. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for spending another hour or less with us. Last week we kicked off our identity series for the month of March. Happy Women's History Month. Yes, okay. Every day is Women's History when you are a beautiful brown woman. I'm just saying. But anyway, we kicked off our identity series and we started talking about like what it meant to us to be a woman of color, just from our perspective, like what it felt like. And we also talked about what made us proud to be beautiful, intelligent, strong, and emotionally intelligent black and brown women. And then we ended up talking about what we needed, and at the end of last week's episode I also shared, excuse me, a couple of tips that came up as themes throughout our conversation. And they were centered around, pouring into your cup unapologetically. I'm not going to name them all because I hope you've already actually seen the episode. If not, please go there first. So that way you'll see this continuum of an amazing, dope conversation that we know that Black and brown women have been waiting to have. And so that's why we have this platform to center and amplify the voices of women of color. Now, this week, we are diving a little deeper into our identity series, and we're going to be looking at the ways that our identity actually shapes our experiences. Like, so outside of ourselves, how do they shape our interpersonal experiences in different areas, right? So when we think about outside of our homes and the workspaces, or if you're in school, because I know that there are lots of young women who are joining us and listening in. And it could also be in your home. It could be at your places of worship, right? Our experiences are constantly being shaped by different contexts, right? And so we're going to actually just dive right in. I want to ask Chantel first, how do you think your identity actually impacts, the way that you show up and are perceived? And just keep in mind that this question is really broad, so you can think about it in terms of any aspect of life, any space you wish. Okay. So how does your identity impact the way you show up and are perceived, Chantel?
So I will start by saying that I will talk about my career. And so my background is in nonprofit business development. And I remember, for about 15 years, I have been fortunate enough to build and support nonprofit organizations in the Baltimore, Maryland area. And so I just remember starting out doing this work, and my colleague turned friend turned sister,
Okay.
and I had the ability to build a nonprofit organization ran by two women of color in a predominantly white culture, or white, environment. And I remember us just getting clear about who we were, what our purpose was, why we needed to be in this space, and being unapologetic about saying we're here. Yes, we know that we are the minority, but we are going to become the majority. And I remember when we would show up in spaces before we would have the meeting before the meeting, right? So we would be out in the hallway just, pumping each other up and getting like, girl, you awesome. No, you awesome. No, we got this. They're going to
Love
give us
it.
this money. And we knew we had to affirm one another in that space. And that gave us the confidence to go into these spaces that were predominantly ran or organized by other people, people who are white, people who are
Mhm.
male. And so, my thing is that we just continue to show up and affirm ourselves, affirm the reason why we knew we needed to be in these spaces. And then we got clear and we got confident about who we were, and in the energy and the power that we brought to those spaces. And so what I would say is, not to really worry about how people perceive you, but how do you perceive yourself in those spaces?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we just continue to show up. And so if anything, show up,
Mhm.
show up, show up. and with your awesome, amazing self. Just show up, and everything else will fall into place.
Chantel says show up, period. You didn't even hear the period, but it
Show
was
up.
she said show up.
Mic drop.
Listen, you
That
gotta
very
drop the
part.
mic on them, honey. You already know. Thank you, thank you. You know, I love what you. I mean, first of all, what's giving me life is that meeting before the meeting, because so many times I think about my experiences in, especially in predominantly white spaces, and there's always that meeting after the meeting. Y'all know what I'm talking about, where folks just want to come by your office, by your
Yes.
classroom, call you on the phone, text you like, girl, I heard that too. Did you? You know what I mean?
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
what I love is launching those preemptive strikes, right? Let's just go ahead and fill up these cups before they spill over. You know what I mean? Let's
Yes,
go ahead and,
yes.
okay, we're going to fill the cups up and screw the lid on real tight so that they won't spill over. So thank you for sharing. I love it, love it. And Weena, can you share with me, like, your insight on how you feel your identity impacts the way that you show up and are perceived?
Okay. And I wanted to kind of go back, I guess, start from the beginning. I grew up in a predominantly Black community, Prince George's County. Of course, I'm African, so that, Black itself. And I went to a HBCU. So I've always been surrounded, and I've always been, I guess, in the majority as far as an African American, a Black woman. And so within that space, in that community, it was always like the comfort to thrive, to be, whoever it is, like it was promoted, like, the strength, just everything that comes with ease when you are in a majority of a group. And then I did not feel a difference, or my identity was not impacted in a negative way until I went to work in a private school. And for the first time, I felt and realized what it felt like to be within the minority. I felt that discomfort from being in that space, because I felt like I always had to, it was always like a silent battle that was happening. And it was very exhausting, because I felt like, I don't know, it's like misunderstood. Like everything I said, I always had kind of like mince my words or watch my words. It was like this it's like this pre thing you have to do. Like before I can even speak, I need to, be aware of how I say it, what I say, because everything is taken in a way, and the way that it's perceived always comes off like, that's not how I meant. Or, like even my facial expression was something that is perceived in a negative, or just perceived different than, what I meant for it to look like, feel like, or, what to understood. And so that space was very uncomfortable for me, to the point where it's like it became too much. I couldn't do it, and I ended up leaving that space. Like I'd rather work in an environment where my identity is not going to be so impacted that it starts to I don't know. It's like it diminishes who I am, or I feel that way. That's how it made me feel. And so I did not like the way it made me feel, and I had to leave that space and went back to my people.
Big ups to you. you know, I was sitting there listening to your stories. There were so many mirrors in what you shared, like so many aspects of what you shared about yourself reflected my own experiences right back at me. And so it's I think it's funny that so far, like, Chantel started talking about her experience like in a professional space, and so did Edwina. And that's actually the first thing that comes to my mind as well, because I know we have 3 out of the 4 of us are educators. And I also think about my time in the field of education, especially in predominantly white spaces, where, and often, especially in positions of leadership, where there was an underrepresentation of Black and Brown folk in leadership. And so often I'm showing up at decision making tables, as the only, right? And not just the only to lend a voice to a decision, but the only to lend a lens, right, to a conversation. And so I think about what you said, Edwina, in terms of that anticipation of well, how is what I'm about to say going to be perceived? And I think about even the like anxiety around all of that.
Mhm.
So in many ways, like showing up armed and prepared to
Mhm.
be, you know, like to be dismissed or
Yeah.
to be silenced or to be, you know, seen as, oh, here she goes.
Here she
You
goes.
know, once again, she's the one. She's the angry Black woman. That's why she keeps bringing this stuff out, because she's mad, right?
Right, right,
And
right.
so,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean. And so at the end of the day, I think a lot about that. You know, there was a documentary that looked at the push out of Black girls out of schools, but and and that's very real. I've seen that, you know, with my own two eyes. And there's a push out of Black and brown women out of organizations and
Mhm.
companies, you know, out of the workplace. You know, there's actually a graphic that I often use when I'm facilitating work that looks at just how systemic it is, like, and how it's, you know, almost like governed by phases, like this honeymoon phase. And, you know, the woman enters and,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, look at the diversity. You know, this is a priority. But then, you know, once we start to actually show up, as Chantel said,
Mhm.
show up, period, right? As we start to actually show up and start to reflect and interrogate, you know, just like some of the practices, hey, I'm noticing this. Can we improve in this way? Then there are consequences for that. There are consequences for that. And this particular graphic that I'm referencing, it is specific to women of color in nonprofits, in which Edwina, you know, in your experience and even in my experience, these, you know, independent schools we're talking about are nonprofit organizations,
Mhm.
and that's applicable across the board. There are women in public, you know, organizations, public schools, or other types of companies, private companies, that show up in spaces that I lead and say, guess what? Oh my gosh, me too, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that's just kind of what I think about. I think about not just how I show up in our perceive, but then what is the impact on my emotional and mental wellness when I'm anticipating, you know, that type
Right.
of backlash. I mean,
Yeah.
that does a lot to us. And so, yeah. So, Nafisa, I mean, can you weigh in terms of, you know, how you feel your identity impacts the way that you show up and are perceived?
Definitely. And I mean, I automatically went to the workplace as well. So that's what we're all going to discuss. I mean, you all touched on a lot of things that resonated with me. I know particularly like when I started teaching, I was very young. I was 23. And I always felt like I was in predominantly white spaces, even though the student body was not predominantly white, was very, you know, predominantly Black students, Hispanic, people of color. But the staff that I worked amongst, they were, you know, they were majority white, and I was always the minority. And I felt like I couldn't be like myself. Like I was always so concerned about every little thing. Like again, like, well, maybe I shouldn't probably braid my hair. How are my nose ring? Is this lipstick too bright? Oh, I don't want to wear this like African print shirt. Like that's too loud. Or then if people were saying something in a faculty meeting that I maybe didn't agree with, or I didn't feel like it was right, I didn't maybe feel like should I say something? I don't want them to think again I'm being the angry Black woman, you know, or being outspoken and being passionate is often, you know, misunderstood, and intentionally I feel like misunderstood. So I was so concerned, and I felt like very early in my career was constantly like walking on eggshells. And you know, I'm in my 18th year, and I've gotten to a point, and probably in the last maybe 5 to 6 years, and I'm in leadership now, and I run a program for the county. But I'm unapologetically my authentic self. So I'm wearing my nose rings, I'm wearing my braids, I'm wearing my cowrie shells as I feel like it, whatever I feel like that day, because that's me. And I feel like when I'm showing up as my authentic self and who I am, that's when I am serving best for everyone and for my students. And also, as you said, like that anticipation in certain meetings of making sure that our voices are being heard and not looked over. And I'm not as concerned about that as I used to be, because I'm like, I don't care. Especially when you tell me that you want to do this equity work. not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. So let's do this equity work throughout, not just you saying you're going to do this equity work and you give me an article. What action are you doing to implement this in our school building? What action are you doing to hold yourself accountable as well as the teachers in this building? And just making sure that our voices are being heard and that they're being centered around all the work that is being done, that the work that's being done. So I feel like I've come to a place in my life where I am unapologetically in the workplace, showing up as my authentic self. I'm holding, my superiors and also my colleagues accountable, for the equitable work and making sure that they hear my voice and that they understand my voice if they choose to understand. Because sometimes I feel like they lean into, well, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand. You do. And if you really don't, there's a way to approach that and educate yourself. And I feel like that's exhausting too, because sometimes I don't always want to carry that burden of educating you on the equity work and educating you on the plight of the Black woman, the Black man, the Black little boy and girl. Because if you're going to be in education, I feel like that's your responsibility. And we shouldn't have to always carry that weight. So that's what I just think of.
That was honestly, you touched on a lot of stuff that really gave me a lot to consider. And I mean, I know, originally I was going to move on to the next question, and we're going to do that in a moment. But, one thing that you said around being intentionally misunderstood. Okay. That was a whole moment, sis, because a lot of times that word I don't understand, I don't get it, oh, I didn't know. Like, first of all, that's not true, right? And a lot of times that label of a misunderstanding is weaponized, right? And is used against us, because then when we call it out, it's like, well, this person meant well. It's like, no, they didn't. I've called this out several times before. Like, how many times are you actually not, understanding what it is that I'm calling out, whether it's a micro or macro aggression, or act of retaliation for speaking up? Because a lot of times what I'm hearing from a lot of women, particularly Black and brown women, is that, it's not a lot of like, very blatant or overt retaliation when we do show up in these spaces and we're standing up and speaking up, but it's a lot of covert stuff, a lot of passive aggressive stuff, right? A lot of leaving, oh, we scheduled this meeting, I figured you were too busy, so leaving our voices out in roundabout ways. Yes. But they're hugely impactful. They're hugely impactful because when you don't have diverse decision makers, then how can you make equitable decisions? How can you expect equitable outcomes? That doesn't even make sense. That's like me as a neurotypical, gathering up all my neurotypical friends and saying, hey, we're going to make all the decisions for neurodiverse folks, for folks who, may have some special needs around learning. That wouldn't even make any sense for me to do that. But yet I feel like when it comes to especially race, especially in the workplace, that you'll see you see that happening a lot of times. People making decisions without the representation that is necessary to actually bring about true change in terms of equity. And the other thing I do want to acknowledge, because you talked a lot, Nafisa, about showing up as your authentic self, which I could not be happier for you. I want to acknowledge that for a lot of our sisters, they don't feel like they can. Right. And for a lot of sisters, there are repercussions depending on, like, I know you work in a public school system, right? And yes. When Edwina was sharing, excuse me, a little bit earlier, and she and I both share this. She still works in public school. I used to, but my most recent education career in school was based in private or nonprofit schools. And, there's a very different reality for when you don't have like union protection and excuse me, and those types of things, when there are organizations that are governed by different sets of rules. And so I want to acknowledge that, because I know that there are a lot of sisters who are listening in thinking, well, yeah, I want to be bold, I want to step out there and do that. And I know that my contract might not be renewed. So I want to name that as something that is very, very real because, excuse me, I'd be remiss if I didn't, affirm the real fears that go through a lot of people's minds. That went through my mind. I went through my mind each time that I showed up. And just like Edwina, I chose to leave that space. But guess what? I chose to leave because I probably was going to be asked to leave. Because in some spaces you can't show up and speak up unapologetically and authentically, but so many times before you're a problem that people want to get rid of. You know what I mean? And what it might not come, again, directly in terms of we're not going to renew your contract because then they may be afraid of a lawsuit, but it may come in other ways, that extra duty. We're gonna give that one to you, that extra class or everyone else maybe just teaching a three course load. We know that you're suited for that. So there are ways in which we are systemically pushed out. But I just wanted to absolutely to mention that and affirm that as a very real fear and experience for a lot of women of color. And even in affirming that, I'm not saying to not show up, but I want to acknowledge that for some people, it may not feel, as easy to do so. But thank you all for that. So I want to move this conversation into another direction or further into this conversation. So Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality. And so, excuse me, I don't know if any of you who are tuning in has ever watched her TED Talk, but she talked about the fact that when you combine two or more identities, there's a very unique experience that's created that is separate, that's different from either or any of those identities on their own. And so this is really, really important for us to talk about. So when we're talking about being a woman of color or person of color and being woman, and so we can imagine these being like streets or crossroads, right? So you can have a street that says, all women are on this street. So you got white women, trans women, you have literally like all people who identify as women. Then you have people of color. And right at that crossroads is a very unique experience. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because oftentimes, you'll have organizations or people around you, they'll say, yeah, I have Black friends, we hire Black people, but you're like, well, we're the Black women, at the helm of your company. We're the brown women, we're the Latinx women, we're the Asian women at the head of your company. And so a lot of times, I feel like we are left out because people will say either, we provide these provisions or we're equitable because of these initiatives around promoting more women or promoting more people of color. But I'm telling you, there are a lot of places where I look around and at that intersection, it looks very, very different. So I want to know from you all, let's talk about this. How do you feel that the intersectionality of being a person of color and being woman, how does that shape your experiences? Do you feel like it shows up a little differently? Anyone can chime in first. What do you think about that?
For me, I guess I haven't really seen an impact because in the field of education, it seems to be a natural woman career path. And of course, so and then so that woman piece is already there. It's just majority women who are teaching, especially when we're talking about elementary education, which is the field of education which I'm in. And then because majority of my education has been in the public school system and Baltimore City Public Schools to be exact, which is majority, I guess, people of color, as far as of children of color, I should say. But even that. That has not been an impact as well, but I do, and because there are no males, it's like you don't get to see that intersection happening within that space of education. There is a little, I guess, I don't know what the word I want to use for it, but when we're talking about a Black woman teacher, there is a very small amount of us, which seems to be getting even smaller as the year progresses on. It's like, okay, you have like this large district of Black and brown children, but then the teachers that are in front of them are looking less and less like them. And so that misrepresentation is definitely right in front of the children. So I see that. And so far, I guess that I would say that that has been my experience as far as the intersection, but gender, as far as gender go, I have not seen that. And I think what is going to probably start happening is when I start to leave out of the career of education as far as the classroom, like leaving out of the classroom, I now want to go into a space of more leadership role. I want to do more with curriculum development. And so that's a new space that I'm about to go in, and I might start, that is probably where it's going to start popping up, where it's like, oh, okay, it seems to be a heavy populated with the male gender, and heavy populated with not a lot of women of color. And so I think that's probably is going to be my next experience.
Yeah, of course, as a fellow educator, I see what you're saying, and actually, I definitely, I agree with you. It's hard to have like a benchmark, against which to like compare your experience, because you're right. We don't typically see a lot of Black men. I think there are a lot of reasons why, and that we need to address it as an education system. I don't think that there's a shortage of men who wish to teach and be involved in education. I think they're not being actively recruited. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of things that I think about that. But I'm actually, as I chime in really quickly, I'm actually going to take it outside of the workplace, and, well, actually sort of in the workplace or in a professional field. I definitely feel like the intersection of my racial identity and my gender identity create a unique experience. I think about, when I showed up in a position of leadership of school administration, as an ambitious, assertive, driven, leader. And I think about the labels that were assigned to me because of that, right? There's like this frowning upon being a woman of color and being assertive. Oftentimes, they'll assign an A word, but it'll be a whole bunch of different A words, but one of them might be aggressive rather than she's assertive and she's clear and focused. And so I do remember my experience feeling very, very, very different. And I knew that part of it was because I was woman, right? Because just being a woman, I feel that there's a lot of expectation around me, just kind of, just following everyone else, not necessarily, having my own goals and sense of direction. But then you got to know to be Black and educated on top of that. And so, so I do see that for me showing up in workspaces and out in the world. When I move throughout the world, when I think about the type of microaggressions that I encounter there, when I tell people like I'm going for my doctorate, I'm running a business full time, I'm homeschooling my daughter full time, I'm cooking, I cook at least 4 nights a week. There's this level of like surprise, like, like something I'm doing is too much. Like, shouldn't you just focus on this? So for me, that's where that intersection definitely impacts, because I'm thinking even beyond the school environment, and even within the school environment. I think about being that Black teacher that the kids loved. You know what I mean? And I mean, I haven't taught with many Black male teachers, but the ones I did, like, there was no problem. That's cool, Mr. So-and-so, cool, Mr. So-and-so. But being the Black woman teacher that the kids love, the Black woman teacher who was writing her own curriculum, the word, I don't know if you remember this, Edwin, but the word assigned was, she's gone rogue. She's gone rogue for giving the kids what they needed. So there was this negative, and that was true story, by the way, y'all. There's a negative connotation from my experience that's placed on me being driven and focused and self-assured and determined. And I experience it as a direct result of my woman and my Blackness at the intersection. Anybody else? Like, what do you all think?
I mean, a lot of things that you both said resonated with me. Obviously, I'm an educator as well. Most of my experience has been in second, well, all of my experience has been in secondary. I've been in high schools my entire career. But I definitely feel that I haven't really seen the intersection so much with gender. A little bit, what makes me think of a little bit is in a position when I was in a position of leadership, and sometimes in meetings or like breakout rooms, like white males like over talking me, or white males that I'm in charge of maybe passively questioning where I have to put them in their place. You know what I mean? So I've seen that occur, almost like, how dare you, Black girl, as you said, where I would feel like I wasn't being as respected as a white male would have been in my leadership position, or a white female. I've had experience with that. Not all the time, but I definitely have experienced it. And I definitely feel like we don't have enough representation of, I can count on my hand how many Black female teachers there are, how many Black male teachers there are. We're definitely a minority, but that's not the minority of our student body. And I do think that's so important, especially in elementary school. And I'm thinking of my daughter, and she has not had a Black teacher yet. She hasn't. And that's something that, does make me sad, because there is a difference. And not saying that, and she's had good teachers. She's had good teachers, and she's had teachers who have cared about her, and she's learned from them. But it is something when your mind is being shaped and you're growing, and just having someone you identify with, and you're seeing that, wow, like I can do this too. Like they're a teacher, they're a principal, and you see yourself in them, and you identify with that. And that's so powerful for our kids, for our boys and our girls to see, and to have that representation, and to have that encouragement. And I feel like a lot of my kids, and my kids who are grown still call me mom, like just my nurturing nature that I would just have. And I call them my kids, and that's how I see them. That's how I've always treated them. And I remember one of my principals kind of like saying something to me, and it was just like, well, do you think like, I don't know about them calling you mom and stuff like that. I was like, look, I can't control how they feel about me. My kids are learning, they're passing their tests, I'm doing my job, I'm doing what I need to do. But I also care about them, and they know that. And that's why they will work for me. They do what they need to do for me, and they respect me because they know I really care, and I have that nurturing feeling towards them. So that made me think of like the gender role as well. Like, I have to feel bad about being nurturing, and you shouldn't be that way, and they shouldn't, call you mom or this, and that. So that's kind of where I feel like I've seen the intersection of as far as my color and gender with those.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so much of what everyone is sharing so far just really gives me pause. It makes me again think about my own experiences. You're absolutely right. And Nafisa, I thank you for touching on representation, especially in education, because at the end of the day, like you said, I mean, a kid needs a good teacher, right? A good teacher that cares about them. But in addition to that, what representation does is it opens up windows of possibilities. Yes. You know what I mean? It says so when we're thinking about education, it says to our students that, if there's a Black woman leading this physics classroom, that I can also be a physics teacher, if that's what I want to be. I can be a scientist, right? Absolutely. And it's not to say that other teachers can't inspire that, but it just, our brains are wired to see patterns and to see color. It is what it is. And so we recognize color, right? Most of us recognize color. And so, when we see folks who look like us and like, oh, she's Black, I'm Black, I see possibilities in my future for me as well. And so that's so important. And it's also important for adults, right? When we think about representation in terms of leadership. When a lot of us are in these companies or organizations and we don't see other leaders that look like us, I know for me, something that goes in my, well, two things. One either can be, well, I'm going to break those glass ceilings, and I'm all for that. And, I would be dishonest if I didn't also say that then there's a level of doubt that creeps in, like, well, is this a place for me? Because, like, why don't I see more of us around here? Like, is there a point at which I stop? So there's constantly this tension of me wanting to prove something, but then also feeling like I might not belong at the same place. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So Chantel, would you go ahead and share your insights on all this?
I think when we're talking about intersectionality, there should be more conversation about us as women, us as Black women, us as mothers, us as nurturers. Everything you guys said really resonated with me. And why do we have to identify with one or the other? Why can't we be both, right? In our homes, in our workspaces. I think when we continue to show up in those spaces with that duality of who we are and completely, that shows our power. That shows the essence of who we fully are as women. And then I will also go on to say that when we're in these spaces, especially when we're talking about our careers, well, we've earned the right to be in these spaces, right? We went to school, we got the education, we climbed the corporate ladder, we worked the extra hours, we sacrificed. So outside of me just being a woman and then a woman of color, let's take all that away for a second and look at my credentials. I've earned the right to be here in this space just like you did. So I am worthy of the same respect, the same acknowledgement, just by way of my credentials alone. And I think we need to continue to have that conversation. And not only that, but I love how we talked about highlighting that for our children, highlighting that for our community, is that you can be both. You can exist in these spaces, and then you've earned the right to be there and be unapologetic in saying, I earned the right to be in these spaces and I deserve these spaces, as showing up as my full self as a woman of color.
No, you're absolutely right, Chantal. You're absolutely right. And the thing is, more often than not, when we are in these positions of power, when we are showing up in these organizations, you better believe it's not because we belong to the same country club or you better believe that we've been fully vetted.
Yeah,
I mean, fully vetted, fully investigated.
You better say it.
I'm just saying. I mean, fully. Every finger has gotten printed and everything.
We've
even when
interviewed
others
the
have
entire
not.
school building. Mm-hmm.
Listen, they've called our babysitters to make sure we were good kids before we show up in these spaces. And so, I do appreciate you saying that because, in my work in facilitating a lot of these conversations, I know that there are some people, and myself included, especially as a facilitator, where the conversations can and are often empowering and affirming, and they can be exhausting. It is often exhausting thinking about our experience. And the reality is that we live in a racial society.
Absolutely.
That's the reality. The reality is folks who say they're colorblind and color doesn't matter, they're lying to you, right? The reality is statistics support the need to continue to have these conversations. Yes, we are way more than the color of our skin. We are way, what did India Ari say? I'm not my eyes, my hair, or anything, or any of the mistakes I made. We are way more than being Black. We're way more than being any of our ethnicities or our racial identities, and even being identified as women. We're way more than that. And when we show up, the ways in which we are perceived absolutely shapes our experiences. Both that internal experience that we have, as individuals navigating these spaces, and all that interpersonal stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis. So that's why these conversations are so important, right? There is a very unique experience that happens at the intersection of being a woman and a woman of color. I mean, fun fact, before I start to wrap this up, is that Black women in particular are starting to head up the workforce. We're like the ones who are really entering the workforce in positively disproportionate numbers. And we're still making up, the lower part of the salary earnings. So we've got a lot of work to do. So that's why this conversation is happening, because whether we are intentional about thinking about our experiences or not, it's real. The numbers aren't lying in terms of what we're earning, what opportunities we're getting. The numbers aren't lying that there is a very unique experience at the intersection of being Black or brown and being woman. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Any closing thoughts? Does anyone have any closing thoughts before I wrap this up? Because we're going to go ahead and let everyone go and go off for their evenings. Any closing thoughts? All right, perfect. That means we had a thorough conversation. So 2 snaps on that one. So I just want to wrap up with 3 ideas that bubbled up throughout this conversation. I hope that there was something that resonated with you. If there was, please tell us what it is. Please tell us what it is in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, we do check the comments. We read them. We promise. If you're watching this in the BGSO group or on the page, again, we read every single thing. Your feedback is more than welcome. It is encouraged. So please let us know how this conversation has impacted you, what you're thinking. Even if you're an ally, how have you seen any of the things that we've described show up? All right. And so anyway, the first thing that came up for me as I was listening to these intelligent women speak is, focus. And I'm talking specifically to my Black and brown women right now, by the way. Focus on being whole. So we have already shared some experiences we've encountered in which maybe our cups were drained a little. Maybe our souls were drained a little. Maybe, maybe our energy was depleted a little. So one thing I want to share with you is if you focus on ways to make yourself feel whole, that's like when Chantel described like that meeting before the meeting, right? So maybe it is being in community with other Black and brown women and y'all pumping each other up. Maybe it's you saying your own affirmation statements before you walk into that room and, join that decision-making table or wherever it is that you're showing up. Focus on what it is that makes you whole. The next thing that I wanted to share was for us to focus on your circle of control. So there are many things that we're going to navigate as women of color that will impact us, both positively and negatively. But just like the serenity prayer, tells us to do, we cannot dwell on those things that we cannot immediately and directly change, right? And so as much as I am so proud of all of the work that many women of color, many Black women, many brown women are doing, many of our Black and brown brothers, many of our allies, co-conspirators are doing, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're influencing change. We're affecting change, but only people can change themselves. So if you focus on what's within your circle of control, what is it that I can directly control, make better, or make different? Then it'll help you focus or filter out some of the other noise, right? And so it may still bother you, but it won't be front of mind. You'll focus on things that are actionable. And the very last thing that came up for me throughout this conversation is to know when to disconnect, right? I see them heads nodding. Know when to disconnect, because there are, just being a woman of color and navigating all these spaces, whether they're predominantly, white or not, because a whole different episode can be about dismantling internalized white supremacy. That's a whole different conversation, but there are a lot of ways in which we do perpetuate, a lot of the oppression that is placed on us in a racialized society, because we breathe the same air, we drink the same water, and it's in all of us. But if we know when to disconnect, know when to back up and say, you know what, this isn't my fight right now or today. Like, I have enough on my plate today, and I'm going to disconnect from all this other noise and maybe just focus on this one thing. So I hope that you found something uplifting, something of value in this conversation. Please join us next week right here every Thursday. We look forward to seeing you. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you are watching us from YouTube, or if you're not, please go to YouTube and like and subscribe. Hope to see you in the group if you are a woman of color. Go us. Go us. All right. Have a good night. See you all next time. Bye.